The NFL was particularly mean to the Titans, Jaguars, and Vikings when creating their 2024 early season schedule. We discuss our worries about Calvin Ridley, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Jefferson, plus other players with tough early schedules on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm breaking down all things NFL, fantasy betting, schedule, draft, all that you can name at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, yesterday, if you missed the episode, we went through all of our favorite early season schedules for notable fantasy, either offenses or players. If you haven't heard that, go listen to it after this show. But today, we're going to talk about the worst early season schedules. And right off the bat, when I was looking through this list, man, did the Titans get a bad early season schedule. And maybe we're not going to be depending on Will Levis anyways, but Calvin Ridley in particular, I do not like this schedule for him to start the year. Right off the bat, weeks 1 through 4, he could see Jalen Johnson with the Bears, Sauce Gardner with the Jets, Jair Alexander with the Packers in week 3, Jalen Ramsey with the Rams in week 4, and then a week 5 bye. It might be not till week 6 where we are excited about his matchup going into the week.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about the Titans and their passing game specifically. We've done some looks at Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. That's been the big thing. But I don't know how much we want to invest in it. It's really confusing to me a little bit now with Calvin Ridley, you have DeAndre Hopkins, you got Tyler Boyd, you got Treylon Burks, you got Chika Okonkwo, you got Spears and Pollard out of the backfield. I'm not sure how the targets are going to break down because it's also a new offense with Brian Callahan. So you're breaking a new offense, a first-time, full-time starting quarterback, their second-rounder in year 2, adjusting to new weapons that are there in Ridley and Boyd. They're going to be on the field quite a bit. So I'm not sure what you're going to get from the Titans, and it could be rough, and we'll see if there's any, like, shadow coverage there. You also have Hopkins. Keep that in mind, and I don't know if Hopkins has as much fantasy appeal with Ridley and all those other guys there. So I don't know. The Titans are just maybe that team that you don't want to invest too much in unless it's their backfield here. It's just not the greatest here. And it's interesting. We were talking about how the NFC North was benefiting from facing the AFC South. Now, the reverse of that isn't so good. And then you look elsewhere, it's not awesome at all, like going to some of these matchups. And it's just really shaky, I would say. So I just say, hey, I mean, the Titans, maybe it's a team we don't want to force in there. We don't want to force to go get Ridley or Hopkins or any of these assets. And this makes us not want them even more. But it does say, okay, if they're down and you see a fantasy manager in your league after week 5 when they have the bye, I want to get rid of these players. Then you might want to jump on them a little bit because at some point Will Levis is going to develop chemistry with one of these receivers. But early out of the gate, Michelle, yeah, the pass defenses are not great. Maybe it'll help Pollard and Spears as they lean on those guys more, but still, I'm just, I'm skeptical overall about what I'm going to get from the Titans early with Levis.
Yeah, the Bears might be one of the best defenses this year. They were over the second half of last season. We know the Jets are going to be great. The Packers should be better this year. Like going to Miami, I just don't like any of these games, which means if they're not moving the ball through the air, they're probably not going to be in many scoring opportunities for Tony Pollard. I was starting to get myself hyped on Tony Pollard, but now that I look at the beginning of the schedule, I'm like, I just don't think it's going to look good for the Titans to start the year. And then they're kind of just dying assets on your roster and just hoping and waiting for them to break out. And you just never know when that might happen or if you should drop them. So the Titans offense, they already were gross. And now looking at the beginning of the schedule, I just don't think I want anything to do with them in drafts. And if, once the schedule starts to open up, maybe I'll take a chance with them if some of them are on waivers. Another one that he's going super early in drafts, as he should, because he's maybe the best wide receiver in the league, but he has a really hard schedule to start the year. It's Justin Jefferson. Now the first game of the year is fine, right? It's against the Giants, but also at the same time, that's going to be possibly JJ McCarthy's first game. So you wouldn't expect like a ton of scoring in this game, because also you just don't expect the Giants to put up a lot of points either. So I would expect that to be a low scoring game. Then they get the 49ers, one of the best defenses of the league in week 2. They get the Texans, who allowed the 11th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and they've added pieces to their defenses last year. Then they get the Packers. I would guess Jair Alexander would be focused on covering Justin Jefferson. And then in week 5, they get the Jets. And I'm guessing again, Sauce Gardner and the Jets, who allowed the fewest fantasy points per game by far to wide receivers last year, will be focusing on Justin Jefferson. And then a week 6 bye. So it's a brutal start to the year for him, besides week 1. And that's if McCarthy can get off to a really hot start to start the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors there. There's McCarthy. There's the potential of Sam Darnold starting, and he would have 2 brutal revenge games against 2 very similar defenses, the 49ers and Jets. And that's my fear there. They're going to look at that week 6 bye and say, I think we'll play Sam Darnold for there. We're not really confident in being a playoff team. We'll play our guy Darnold through the London game and then come back and start McCarthy. I actually want McCarthy more than Darnold, because that'll mean that McCarthy's played well enough to earn the job, and they are just not defaulting to Darnold. I mean, I get it. He's flashed a little bit in fantasy with some teams, but we know he's just not that good. So overall, I don't think that's good for Justin Jefferson. You also maybe him being more of a marked man, because TJ Hawkinson is on the mend. So it's another factor that's going to come in. So early in the season, I would say I'm going to look at that Justin Jefferson manager in your league and say, oh, they're playing the Lions in week 7. That's when I want to have Justin Jefferson and go in and out. So I think there's going to be a lot of trade offers that managers are going to be very disappointed for multiple factors here: defensive matchups, quarterback concerns, supporting cast concerns, all these things that could come up for Justin Jefferson where he could underwhelm. And when I say underwhelm, he probably will still finish as a wide receiver 3+ or wide receiver 2. He just won't be that guy that everyone's drafting to be top 3, like up there with Jamar Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think just be patient. I think there's going to be an opportunity there. So early trade for alert with Justin Jefferson and going into week 7.
The week 6 bye would be the perfect time to do it, because they're going to be like, oh, maybe this all comes to fruition and he does struggle against these hard defenses just because of everything. And then also they don't want to they don't want to hold on to him through the week 6 bye, but you're willing to do that because he's Justin Jefferson. That would be a really good time. We'll see what happens throughout that first month. Maybe he just ends up being absolutely amazing because he's Justin Jefferson. We're not saying like don't draft Justin Jefferson, but maybe that is the difference when you're trying to decide between Jefferson or Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Jefferson or Chase, or Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. Like maybe that is the tiebreaker, and it gets into your head a little bit. But we'll get into 2 quarterbacks who have really tough matchups to start the year as well. They're going kind of in the middle rounds of drafts. One guy I'm high on, one guy you're high on, but we'll get into that in our next segment.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and hopefully those guys will overachieve, much like Justin Jefferson will. All right, we've talked about how exciting the action has been here in the NHL and NBA. Surprises, comebacks, series that were going one way, then totally shifted another way, like the Nuggets and Timberwolves. So there's been so much of that here. And we also like a little bit of unpredictability. So you have a little bit of opportunity there. And it's winner take all time here pretty soon as we get closer to the finals on hardwood and hockey. NBA and NHL betting, FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Michelle, let's get into the quarterbacks. I'll let you start with the one that you like and why you were a little bit concerned, Dak Prescott and his early season schedule.
Yeah, so I do think the other quarterback we're going to talk about, Trevor Lawrence, he has a little bit harder of a schedule, but Dak Prescott also has a hard schedule here. Not very nice of the NFL to make the Cowboys face the Browns in Cleveland in week 1. We know how good the Browns defense was last year, and they also gave up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks last season. The Saints are up and down. That's their week 2 matchup, but they did allow the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks last year. And if Marshawn Lattimore is healthy, which we would expect in week 2, I know he doesn't stay healthy for long, but he should be able to take on CeeDee Lamb, right? And make things harder for Dak Prescott because that's like his one weapon in that offense. Then he gets the Ravens in week 3, another amazing defense, the best scoring defense from last year. They did lose some pieces, but still the Ravens are always good, right? Then they finally get a nice matchup against the Giants in week 4. And then they play the Steelers in week 5 at Pittsburgh. That's never super easy. And they also allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks last year. So it's really not until like they get their week 4 nice game and they get the Lions in week 6. Those are fine. But 4 of those first 6 games are pretty brutal. Then they get the bye and then the 49ers at the 49ers. Like rough first half of the year for Dak Prescott.
Yeah, getting the AFC North is not the best draw because you have a lot of interesting defensive teams, and Bengals should also be a little bit better with all their pieces healthier and back here. So we know the Browns, Ravens, Steelers; those are already hard matchups with their pass rushes and all the things that they can do in the secondary as well. Then there's always the Texans there later. That's their kind of crossover extra AFC game. That's not easy. And then you look, okay, they get the break with the NFC South overall, but that's really the only true break. I mean, their division should be better. I mean, they'll see Dan Quinn, who's going to maybe scheme better against them. The Giants should be improved, and Eagles can be better as well. So these teams that were all kind of rolling over in past defense should be better. And then these teams that we know are established are going to give them a lot of trouble. So I think I wouldn't downgrade Dak Prescott a lot, but keep in mind, again, the weapons are limited. And if they can take away CeeDee Lamb, as you mentioned, and if the Cowboys can't run their way out of it with Ezekiel Elliott and their replacement backs, then it's going to be tough at times to put up numbers. But that also says Dak is going to have to throw a lot once again because their running game is going to be not reliable. So I still think the numbers can be there. I just think you have to be patient with him early if he's your one guy as a QB1 in a 1 QB league.
Yeah, it's the same thing again. Like I'm not going to be moving down my ranks just because of the schedule, but at the same time, it's just another way to use a tiebreaker. Like if you're really close on 2 guys, I mean, Jordan Love and Dak Prescott are going pretty close together. We just talked about yesterday. Love's schedule is just absolutely fantastic, and it goes throughout pretty much the whole year. So that's going to make me lean towards Jordan Love because they are close in my ranks. Or maybe instead of taking Dak in the 6th, 7th round, I wait and take Purdy a couple rounds later, or I wait and take Jared Goff a few rounds later because of how nice Goff's schedule is too. So maybe it just changes my focus a little bit. I won't have them ranked all that differently, but just scares me for the first half of the year. And then Trevor Lawrence, I mean, they also get not a very nice schedule, right? 3 home games to start the year. 3 of their 4 games are away, and the 1 home games against Cleveland. So a tough defense, but also their first game of the year at Miami. And I know the Jaguars are used to the heat because they live in Jacksonville, but South Florida heat just hits differently. I've lived there. It hits differently. Plus it's a 1 p.m. game, and we know what the Dolphins do to their opponents. They put them on the sideline where the sun is directly on them, while the Dolphins sideline is in the shade. They are directly in the sun, and it messes with opponents. It really does. And September 8th, being directly in the sun at 1 p.m., that's brutal. That's not fun.
In general, I don't think the NFL likes the Jaguars. I'm just going to say that because, again, sometimes it takes the old London trip to get the Jaguars going, and now they got 2 back-to-back. I mean, these are not good ones. I mean, you look week 6, week 7, so you get past that early stretch where you have the Dolphins, Browns, and Bills and Texans, and then the Colts, might be okay at home, but then you got to face the Patriots and Bears back-to-back in London. So, I mean, that's rough, and there's no bye the next week, so I don't know. They must hate them so much, or like and then you don't get a bye till week 12. So some of the things are going to be snags. I will say their closing schedule in the playoffs isn't too bad because they get the Raiders and Titans, but can you really wait that long for the Jaguars to keep coming through? Like, I don't know. I just don't see a lot of upside with the Jaguars schedule. And then the Eagles look like a good matchup in week 9, but I think they'll be better in the secondary. And I just don't see a lot of games where we're going to fully trust Lawrence in this offense, especially the way it's been going and not really having any real significant change, right? So, I want to back Trevor Lawrence as much as I can. He might just be a better reality quarterback than fantasy quarterback at this stage, if that's even the case. But this is a make or break year for him. I think he's going to have to cut through some of these tough matchups. If you can do that early, then you're going to have more confidence. Okay, here's a guy that can put up numbers no matter what in whatever situation. But right now, you can't be too confident about what you see.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It really is. But you brought up the 2 back-to-back games in London, and the Bears were over the second half of the season allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. So we're allowing 12 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the second half once they got Roquan Smith. Like, their defense got really, really good. Was it no Montez Sweat? Did they get Roquan
Yeah.
Smith? Both?
Yes.
They both?
And they did both well. They did perform well for
Oh,
them.
wait, no,
Yes.
Roquan Smith is with the Ravens. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was with the Bears. Once they got
Yeah.
Montez Sweat, that's when
Very good.
the defense
They
really
have
changed.
different guys in there. I mean, I think the bottom line is what you're saying is the Bears defense is tough, and so is
Yeah.
the Patriots. I mean,
But
those
also,
teams
right, bringing up further into the Packers, just the NFL loves the Packers, man, because
Yeah.
when you look at those 2 games that the Jaguars play, when they come back home after London, guess who they play? Not
Yeah,
off of a bye. It's the Packers.
they're going to like Green Bay fans are just going to be there, and it's going to be not fun.
My
So
goodness.
I don't know. Yeah, you're just asking for a little bit of a trouble spot here if you're draft Trevor Lawrence, and you can hope for the best, but I still think it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. And our final segment, we have 2 running backs, kind of mid-tier running backs that are going to have a pretty tough schedule to start the year. We'll talk through those and if we're moving them down our ranks at all in our final segment. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home big wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So I was looking through the schedule and it did pop up to me with the Cardinals. They have a pretty tough schedule when it comes against the run, right? So maybe Kyler Murray might struggle against the run a little bit, but James Conner in particular, he has to face 3 of the top 4 defenses against running backs from last year in the first 5 weeks of the season. So it's going to be pretty hard for him here against the Bills, the Rams, and the Lions, and then also the 49ers in week 5.
Yeah, this is another strike against James Conner. I mean, Kyler Murray is running now without a knee injury issue. That's one thing. We know they drafted Trey Benson, so that's another thing. So it could be the end of the run for James Conner here in fantasy as a relevant, pretty consistent RB2 or RB1 that he's been the past few years in Arizona, transitioning from Pittsburgh. So, yeah, that's a really tough start. And that also might say if he struggles a little bit, they might continue to lose games. I might want to turn the page to the future in Benson here to see what they have in the backfield, given probably Connor's not going to be part of their plans in 2025 and beyond. So that's also a concern. Will his ineffective running and limited production lead to a change there where Benson becomes the guy? But all to say, that's a really good running back stash for you to have Trey Benson, especially with Connor's durability issues as well, because the schedule gets a little bit better. I mean, you look down the stretch, you get the Panthers there in the Rams, and the second 49ers game is actually off the fantasy schedule in week 18. So that's a little bit of a break there that you look. Second half schedule after the week 11 bye, a lot better for Arizona's running game. But at that point, we're not sure that James Conner is going to be the lead back in this offense if they struggle enough. So, yeah, this is, I think, a year to continue to fade James Conner, I think, in rankings. He's just has limited upside for you. And if he gets out of the gate and he's a rushing dependent here, he's not going to catch a lot of passes in those games, then you're facing an uphill battle.
I mean, this early game is so interesting to me. The Cardinals versus the Bills, right? Because a few years ago, this would have been a top game on the schedule. And now it just seems like,
It
oh man,
was.
this is going to be a blowout, right? But at the same time, Kyler Murray's going to be fully healthy, right? Knock on wood.
Yeah.
But like and maybe this offense with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride and James Conner, like, they could be really, really good. And the Bills defense lost a lot of pieces. They could be really bad. Like this could be a game that's 30-30, right? Like you expect the Bills to destroy the Cardinals defense, but maybe the Cardinals offense will also be able to put up a lot against the Bills. So I do expect this not to be a great game script for the running game. So I'm still putting this in a game that's not great for James Conner. But I just, now the more I'm seeing this game week 1, Bills at the Bills, or Cardinals at the Bills, I'm getting more and more excited for that game. It could be sneaky great.
Yeah, I think I do actually like the Cardinals passing game a little bit more. That's also maybe just the fact that Kyler Murray is going to be healthy and more comfortable. That's going to maybe force them to pass a little bit more in the type of game. Keep in mind, the game script against the Bills could be bad, right? Where they can't stick with the run and James Conner. So those are things you have to consider. I mean, we're getting deep already here. Again, these teams that did poorly or well last year, there's going to be some changes. So the teams try to get better. If they were terrible, they know it. If they were terrible against the run or the pass, they were going to try to make the improvements, but we have to see it to believe it. And sometimes out of the gate, that's why we're not projecting week 8 through 18, right? We can't do that because a lot of things are going to change, but we have to base it on what we know from early. And some of those things take time to gel if they have new personnel or scheme. So that's when you look at the schedule being tough or easy. So yeah, again, you just look at the circumstances best you can here. And again, you see some potential shootouts. I mean, the Rams could be shootout, Lions could be, and they could abandon the run in those situations as well. So James Conner, again, just a few notches that I want to drop and a few knocks on him for sure with some of the circumstances.
One running back that I was already lower on just because his upside, I just don't see it. But it's Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco. He gets a really tough start of the year. First, right off the bat, he gets the Ravens. There's a really good defense, right? And we saw Pacheco play just in one of his last games of the year last year in the AFC Championship. He had 24 carries in that game for 68 rushing yards. He averaged 2.8 yards per carry against the Ravens. The Ravens allowed the fewest rushing touchdowns to running backs last year as well. And I said Pacheco is going to be highly, highly dependent on touchdowns, right? So not a great first matchup. The Bengals are all right. They were middle of the pack last year against fantasy running backs. But I expect this to be a heavy passing game. Chiefs versus the Bengals with Joe Burrow versus Patrick Mahomes. And then you get the Falcons in week 3. They were the 5th best against fantasy running backs last year. Also tied with the Ravens for allowing the fewest rushing touchdowns to running backs last year. And then you get the Chargers. They have been kind of weaker against running backs. But then the Saints in week 5. 8th best against fantasy running backs last season. Then you get a bye in week 6. And then you get the 49ers in week 7, 4th best against fantasy running backs. That's a pretty hard schedule going through the first 7 weeks of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about the key to Pacheco's value being what it is or having any upside is he's got to continue that pass catching role from the playoffs and into the Super Bowl. Can that continue? Because that would offset some of these things in half and full point PPR if he can get 3 grabs for 25 or 30 yards a game. I mean, that adds a little bit of numbers there to what he's doing, but I don't know if he's going to be consistently involved in the passing game the way the Chiefs want, especially now that they can stretch the field a little bit better with Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. So maybe they're not going to have Mahomes check down so he could take off and run. So yeah, I was hoping for a little bit better with Pacheco, but yeah, it's really hard. I think Connor and Pacheco are cut from the same cloth as they're not going to give you those cheap points the way like an Alvin Kamara would, just catching passes, or even a Bijan Robinson catching those passes to pad their totals. They need some rushing performances and scores to really make them pay off. And scores are hard to predict. We know that. They're almost impossible, except you say, okay, high scoring game, chances for more touchdowns. That's the only thing you can look at. And that might be what saves Pacheco, because the Chiefs can put themselves in position near the goal line a lot with Mahomes. So really, it's just a hard guy to assess because we're not sure of his pass catching role or how much he is going to get the ball in those short yardage situations near the goal line. So with all that being said, I just think the schedule early is too tough.
Yep. I was already off of him, but this made it
Yeah.
much more concrete for me. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, Vinny and I will be back on Monday. Everybody enjoy your weekend. Bye, y'all.